A rift in the GCC is deepening. Some fear pushing a 36-year alliance to the brink of dissolution. The Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Sabah, said as much when he warned last week of the risks of escalation, including military intervention. Kuwait has played mediator in the diplomatic crisis surrounding Qatar and its Gulf neighbors, but to little effect. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt have cut diplomatic ties with Qatar, accusing it of funding terrorism, cozying up to Iran, and meddling in the internal affairs of other countries. They've enforced a punitive boycott, blocking their land, air, and sea routes to Qatar, saying the blockade would only be lifted if Qatar met a list of 13 demands, which includes closing Al Jazeera and cutting all ties with Iran. But nearly 5 months on, Qatar isn't bending. And with a GCC summit coming up next month, its membership and the solidarity of the bloc in general hangs in the balance.
Now Qatar is saying it feels sympathetic towards Iran and Saudi Arabia. We do not want anybody to sympathize with us for anything. We are capable, with God's will and strength, to face all those who attempt to interfere with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So congratulations on Iran, and soon, God willing, you will regret it.
Even though it's been more than 100 days, they failed to present any convincing evidence on what they claim. Any convincing evidence which exists proving that Qatar supports and funds terrorism.
Qatar has long been perceived by Saudi Arabia to be punching above its geopolitical weight. Revenue from Qatar's major natural gas reserves have helped it pursue an independent economic and political agenda. While Saudi Arabia is a major exporter of oil, not natural gas, meaning it can't outsupply or undersell Qatar to apply economic pressure for political purposes. Qatar's support of the Muslim Brotherhood, a group which was instrumental in the toppling of autocrats during the Arab Spring, has undoubtedly been a bone of contention. Saudi Arabia faces its own internal pressures. A burgeoning young population, many who rely on a diminished public sector reeling from record-low oil prices. Emboldened by new U.S. leadership in the Trump administration and its hawkish position on Iran, Riyadh may be trying to reset the regional political landscape. But some are concerned that if the GCC standoff intensifies, it could imperil the future of an alliance which works to foster security in a region that has far too little. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Paris is Salman Al-Ansari. He's the founder and president of the Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee. From Doha, we have Sultan Barakat. He's the founding director of the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. And rounding up our panel from Washington, D.C., we have Jim Phillips. He is a senior research fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks all so much for joining us. I'd first like to hear from each of you on where you think this crisis stands. In every dispute, something eventually has to give. What will it be? Salman, let me start with you.
Thank you, Andrea, for having me, and hi to all the viewers of TRT World around the globe. I think we should not call the crisis Gulf crisis. It should be called like the Qatari crisis because it's something that has been inflicted by Doha, and we need to basically have zero tolerance to all advocates and promoters of terrorism, specifically the terrorist ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I think the steps of the ATQ, the anti-terror quartet, is very crucial and very important to make Qatar to get back to its mind, to get Qatar to be abiding by the international and regional laws that can secure the region. Let me be very frank, Andrea. Right now, we all have seen the kind of impact of this Qatari boycott, the boycott of the ATQ. And we have had some very positive outcomes out of this boycott. One of them is the Qatari government actually signed an MOU with the United States, which is something that the Qataris have refused to do in the past because they want to keep all their anti-terrorism mechanism for themselves. But right now they are more exposed to the world, specifically to the United States, which is a great step. The other thing is that the United Nations have had a lot of people in the sanctioned list. And right now there are a lot of talks about having Qataris to put those people or to arrest those people who are living right now, up till now, in Doha, who are actually put in the sanctions list of the United Nations and also the Treasury Department of the United States, and also by the 4 countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates. So I think we have had some very good outcomes out of this boycott. I think we are looking forward to see more outcomes out of this boycott. Qatar needs to get back to its mind. There is no way possible for them to continue sponsoring terrorism and to support the Muslim Brotherhood and to support all those militias like Fajr Libya militia in Libya, or Jabhat al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda affiliated group in Syria, or also Al-Houthis, because we all have seen not only the media engine of Al Jazeera and the Qatari propaganda to be supporting Al-Houthis, but also we have seen there were some leaks of intelligence calls between Qataris and Houthis, and it's for the public right now. Everyone can see it. So I think it's the time for Qatar to be responsible. It's the time for Qatar to abide by the international law, specifically after the Riyadh summit, when more than 55 Muslim leaders met with the President of the United States. They've had it very clear: zero tolerance to terrorism. And if you want to join us in this club, you're welcome. If not, you're gonna face the consequences.
Okay, Sultan Barakat. So it's all on Qatar, according to Salman. And it seems, according to him, that Qatar is starting to understand what it needs to do. Is that your take as well?
I should start by saying that I'm not really here to defend the Qatari position on this. I see myself as an independent academic who hopefully will give you an objective analysis. And this is why, listening to my friend Ansari, I feel very disturbed that we start mixing definitions and policies and actions all together with the main objective of presenting Qatar as the ugly person here. Few of the points Ansari made, we need to stop at those issues and maybe look at them slightly more carefully. You cannot in any way equate Muslim Brotherhood with terrorism, full stop. And anyone who does this, I think, is making a big mistake. What's going on in Egypt is not terrorism versus the state. There are people versus the state. There are various understandings of Muslim or political Islam. There's a whole range of it. So I think in order to resolve this, we should first agree on the definition of what do we mean by terrorism. Next, when we talk about al-Nusra, we talk about the extremist groups in Syria. All were guilty at the beginning of the war in supporting those who were seen as opposing Assad. Turkey did, Qatar did, Saudi Arabia did, the United States did, Britain did, a lot of other groups supported everyone and anyone who was able to take up arms against Assad. Now, as the war developed, some of those groups developed extreme positions and associated themselves with international terrorist organizations and so on. And I think Qatar was one of those countries that had withdrawn and changed its perception, its position in relation to supporting those groups very early on in the conflict. And the third point he's made in relation to Qatar signing the MOU with the United States. Qatar may have signed it a bit late, but at least it signed it. Other countries who are blockading Qatar has not signed the same arrangement with the United States and do not have the same arrangements with the United States. So I think we have to be really very objective when we look at this, because as far as I see it, and I'm not a national of the Gulf, it is harming the Gulf as a whole. And it's not just affecting Qatar. This exercise that's going on for more than 6 months now has ridiculed the whole Gulf nations, the 6 of them put together in front of the international community. And I think they really need to get their act together, and they need to take very careful look at what is being said and how it's being presented. so that the benefit is there for all the Gulf people. We have 50 million people living within the GCC, or 50, maybe 55 by now.
Okay.
And I don't think they deserve what's going on at the moment.
Okay, Salman, I'll get your response in a minute, but first I want to turn it over to Jim Phillips, and just, Jim, get your assessment of where you think this crisis really stands, what will have to give to find a resolution here, if that's even possible at this point.
Well, I think from the point of view of Washington, this crisis comes at a very bad time. ISIS has not even been defeated yet totally, but the coalition appears to be splintering in some ways with the fighting and friction between the Kurdistan regional government and the government in Baghdad. And now with this Qatar crisis, there are reports that President Trump himself may become involved in trying to broker some kind of a face-saving solution for both sides in this conflict. The leader of Qatar reported that the president invited him to go to Camp David at some point for these talks, although the talks officially have not been announced. It remains to be seen whether that actually will happen, but from the Trump administration's point of view, there is some desire to see Qatar improve its efforts to fight terrorism, especially on the financial side and the ideological side, but there is also an urge to repair the damage to the relations between these former allies and get them focused on the threat from ISIS and the threat from Iran, which in the long run is even greater than the Islamic State or ISIS.
Can you give me a more specific answer here in where you think Qatar could bend in satisfying the demands of the other GCC members that want it to change its stance on various issues as they've listed?
Well, I think Qatar could consider compromises on several different issues. From Washington perspective, cracking down on the financial support of terrorism would be probably at the top of that list. But Al Jazeera is widely known to present distorted news. It did that with loops of news footage in the war against Iraq that it used to discredit the U.S. It also has presented distorted news on other fronts, and that may be something that Qatar could consider correcting.
Okay, Jim, just let me clarify. When you say that Qatar could bend on its financing of terrorist organizations, do you include then the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the primary target there, as a terrorist organization?
I think the Brotherhood is, I would classify it as a starter drug that many of its members go on to use the same ideology to justify terrorism. But I think from the standpoint of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the Brotherhood is a threat to their internal stability, and from their point of view, could be considered a terrorism group.
Okay. Jim, let me turn it over to Salman Al-Ansari now, and I want you to respond to something Sultan Barakat was saying, and where you think this does leave the Gulf and how it affects its lack of unity and the wider region in that sense, as well as the perception internationally of the Gulf states being so disunified.
I think just going back to Mr. Barakat's point about Syria and about how Qatar has been actually involved in supporting Jabhat al-Nusra. He actually admitted the fact that Qatar was involved in supporting Jabhat al-Nusra, which is affiliated to Al-Qaeda. But the only difference he mentioned was the fact that he tried to say that all the other countries like Saudi and others were in the same camp of supporting it, which is not true and has no facts at all. There's no fact or evidence about that, but there are all facts that pointing at Qatar with that regard. This is number one. Number two, when it comes to the political dynamics in the region and how we should all be united to confront Iran, let me be very frank. We cannot confront Iran without confronting the groups that support the bigger plan of Iran. And the groups that support the bigger plan of Iran is basically the Muslim Brotherhood. Why I'm saying so? Because Iran cannot operate in any country without having some sort of a turmoil, some sort of an issue within the countries, without having some states within states. And the Muslim Brotherhood has been, in that regard, very effective in creating states within states, which is something cannot be tolerated by all the countries in the regions. If Qatar wants to pursue its support of the Muslim Brotherhood, let's be very frank. Like, I know that there are some people who would say the Muslim Brotherhood is not a terrorist organization and you should not label it, etc. But let's be very frank. What about having the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood, who's residing in Doha right now, who is considered to be the Mufti of Qatar, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who kept being justifying any terrorist action against Egypt, including the bombing of some churches within Egypt. So having those people, having this ideology is very, very dangerous, and we need to confront it with force, and we need to confront it with zero tolerance.
Salman, I need to cut you off there. We just need to say goodbye to Jim Phillips, who was joining us there from Washington, D.C. Jim, unfortunately, our satellite time is finished, but thank you so much for your insight. And I'd like to turn it back to Sultan Barakat.
Thank you.
And I would also like to turn our discussion back to the most current issue in this crisis, in that will it put an end to the GCC, and how important is that for Qatar, the other GCC members, the region, and the world?
There is a real risk that it could put in an end to the GCC. And I think that would be extremely sad and would be a huge waste of 36 years of investment. The GCC until today, or until June, or 5th of June, has been the most effective multinational organization that we've known in the Arab world for a long time. And I think its integrity is very important for the stability of the Gulf, for the prosperity of the Gulf population, and more so to be able to stand up to the threat of Iran. If the GCC is dismantled or weakened, I think everyone is going to lose in this issue.
What's been made of the demand to shut down the Al Jazeera network? Being in Doha, you've seen what Al Jazeera network broadcasts. It's a very influential media organization in various languages. Do you think it's fair, Sultan, that they would demand that media organization be shut down because of what they feel are its skewed and manipulative reports?
Well, the demand is not just to shut down Al Jazeera. They wanted to shut down a number of media outlets that are either fully or partially or invested in by Qatar, partially supported or invested in by Qatar. And that does tell you that the issue is really about freedom of speech. The blockading countries do not wish to have any space where people can express their opinions freely, or their resentment to the way they're ruled, or whatever. And you could see this, and you can understand it from their position, because their populations are not used to this. They have had exactly the same opportunity as Qatar to invest in free media, and they decided not to do. They put their money in media like the NBC, making films, music, etc. A lot of it backfired because it was very much against the core cultural value of their own population. It may have made money in the short term. It has some returns in terms of mobilizing the young people and so on. But culturally, it was a bad investment. Now, Qatar went for news, and they invested in Al Jazeera. And in fact, it's always good to remember that Al Jazeera originally was a Saudi-British project, wasn't a Qatari BBC project. And then it became a Qatari BBC when the Saudi failed to honor its commitment to freedom of expression. Now, these are historical facts that we must consider whenever we talk about Al Jazeera. And I must say also, I mean, watching what happened with Al Jazeera over the years and so on, Al Jazeera did maybe go a little bit off tangent during the Arab Spring. And I think very few people will try and defend the Arabic Al Jazeera during the Arab Spring as such.
Okay. Salman, I'm sorry we lost you there earlier, but I want to get your take particularly on the very heart of this discussion and what now happens to the GCC. Is it in danger of falling apart, and how profoundly will that affect the Middle East and the Gulf itself?
Okay, great. I think, as we all know, that the GCC has actually established in the early 80s for the main reason of combating the dangers, or to confront the dangers that are within the Middle East, specifically the radical Iranian regime. And this is number one. Number two, if we have one of the GCC members to be acting against the will of the other GCC nations, against the security of the other GCC nations. So I think in order to make the GCC stronger, we actually need to put that member accountable. And that's what's exactly happening. And we need to refer back to what Adel Jubeir, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Saudi Arabia, has said. He said it very clearly, that the Qatari issue is very, very small. So we should not give it like more of like a momentum, as if Qatar is having this kind of influence to make the whole GCC to collapse, or any of those big claims. So I think we will keep going. The four countries will keep going forward, and will try to identify any risk here and there, and we'll deal with it. This is number one. Number two, with regard to what Mr. Barakat has said about Al Jazeera channel, let me be very frank. Al Jazeera channel has been hosting people from ISIS, members of ISIS, in Doha, and they are all on the record, all on YouTube. Anyone can watch, and having people who praise Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. Is that something to be freedom of expression, or more of a marketing tool to market for those militant, despicable groups? This is not acceptable at all. So if anyone wants to talk about Al Jazeera, they should not mix it up with the idea of freedom of expression. It's all agenda-driven to promote hatred and to promote intolerance in the Arab world, which is something that cannot be accepted at all.
Salman, we need to go, but Sultan, I'll let you quickly respond to that in the last 30 seconds.
I'm not aware of them hosting ISIS members, but we all remember the days when they were a real irritant to the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the reason for that was that they were able to access those sites under the bombardment of the Americans, and were broadcasting for the rest of the world, and particularly for the Arab world, what was going on. We remember the coverage of Al Jazeera in Gaza, in South Lebanon, etc., etc. So I don't think that it is fair, really, to say that Al Jazeera is behind the ills in the Arab society. Al Jazeera transmits what's going on in the Arab society and does not make the news. We should focus on how we should adjust our own policies, our own politics, to ensure that we avoid going into those difficult situations. And I feel for Saudi Arabia as it goes through the change in its leadership. I also feel the same pressure the United Arab Emirates suffers from the Muslim Brotherhood. They have their own indigenous movement of Muslim Brotherhood, and they feel the threat, as does Egypt. But that doesn't mean that we should close our eyes and pretend we don't hear, we don't see, and things will resolve themselves. We know from history that it won't. There will be uprising again and again, and stability will be a real far objective to all.
Sultan Barakat, I will have to give you the last word. Thank you so much for joining us, as well as Salman Al-Ansari on the Newsmakers.